Discourses by Meher Baba, Volume 2, True Discipleship, pages 36 to 45, Revised 6th edition, reading by Gabriella Tal. Discipleship is vital relation. When an aspirant becomes voluntarily affiliated with a master, he is said to have become a disciple. But if this affiliation is merely formal, it does not constitute true discipleship. The relationship between disciple and master is utterly different from the legal relations which create rights and liabilities through verbal transactions or formal agreements. Discipleship is one of the fundamental features which characterize the life of the advanced aspirant. And it does not come into existence through any artificial procedure. It arises out of the basis laws of spiritual life. It is therefore much more significant than the mundane relations which arise within the context of ordinary social life as a result of incidental associations or temporary contracts. Many of these mundane relations do not enter into the spiritual fabric of the life of the aspirant, but remain superficially attached to his being. Thus, it is not of any great consequence whether you purchase a thing from one shopkeeper or another, as long as you pay the price for it. And it is immaterial whether you travel by one ship or another, so long as you arrive at your destination. Even such transactions are no doubt inwardly determined by sanskaric ties and karmic laws, and therefore are not entirely devoid of spiritual significance. But these relations are in their very nature provisional and superficial, and are in no way comparable to the vital bond of discipleship, which gives substance and direction to the life of the aspirant. Love implied in discipleship is unique. The relation between master and disciple is an inevitable outcome of intrinsic conditions in the life of the aspirant. It is primarily a relation between the lover and his divine beloved. From the spiritual point of view, it is the most important relationship into which a person can enter. The love, which constitutes the core of discipleship, stands by itself among the different types of love which prevail in ordinary social relations. Mundane love is an interplay between two centers of God unconscious, but the love implied in discipleship is the love of God unconscious for God conscious. Everyone is God, but some are unconscious of their divinity. Some are partly conscious of their divinity, and a few are fully God conscious. Those who are unconscious of their divinity can have no idea of the God state. They are only conscious of the body state. In order that they should inherit the God state, they have to love, worship, and be guided by the Master, who is constantly dwelling in the God state. Supremacy of claim of the Master. The love which the aspirant has for the master is really the response evoked by the greater love which the master has for the aspirant. It is to be placed above all other loves. Love for the master naturally becomes a central power in the life of the aspirant because he knows the master to be an embodiment and representation of infinite God. All his thoughts and aspirations, therefore, come to be woven around the personality of the master. The master thus has unquestioned supremacy among the claims recognized by the aspirant, and it is through this supremacy that the master becomes the focal point for the radiation of spiritual forces which dispel all darkness, pluck out the sins of the heart, and initiate the aspirant into a life of freedom and truth consciousness. All love leads to the master. The fundamental requisite for the candidate who would be a true disciple is an unquestioning love for the master. All the other streams of love ultimately join this great river of love for the master and disappear in it. Majnun loved Leela. He loved her so intensely that every moment of his life he was filled with thoughts about her. He could not eat, drink, or sleep without thinking of her. And all he wanted was the happiness of Leela. He would gladly have seen her married to some other person if he felt it to be in her interest. And he would have even died for her husband if he had thought she would thereby be happy. The utter self-denial and sincerity of his love ultimately led him to the master. Every second of his life, he thought not of himself, but of the beloved, and this lifted his love from the physical or intellectual level and made it spiritual. The spiritualization of his love led him to the divine beloved. Purification through love and self-surrender. The master is the divine beloved, and when the disciple meets his master, all that he has to do is to love him. For if the disciple loves the master out of the fullness of his heart, his final union with him is assured. He need not worry about the quality of his love. He should love in spite of his weaknesses, and not tarry till he can purify his own heart. The master is the very source of purity, and to set one's heart on the master is the beginning of self-purification. When the disciple has wholehearted devotion for the master, he opens himself to the reception of the divine love which the master pours upon him. All his weaknesses are consumed in this fire of divine love, of which he thus becomes the recipient. If the disciple is to be free from all weaknesses and attain incorruptible and infinite purity, he has to dedicate his life to the master without any reservations or provisions. He must offer his weaknesses as well as his vices, his merits as well as his sins. There should be no ifs and buts about his offering. His self-surrender must be so complete as to allow no room in his mind for even a shadow of any secret self-desire. Complete self-surrender. Value of faith. Complete self-surrender and unquestioning love become possible when the disciple achieves unswerving faith in the master. Faith in the Master is an indispensable part of true discipleship. Once God is realized, there is no question of faith at all, just as there is no question of faith when a man knows himself to be a man. But till this state of realization is attained, the faith which the disciple places in the Master is his most reliable guiding light and is comparable to the steering wheel of the ship. It is not correct to describe faith as being blind, for it is more like sight than like unrelieved ignorance. But it has to be short of direct experience until the aspirant realizes God for himself. It is not for nothing that all the religions are referred to as faiths. One of the essentials of the aspirant's life is that he should have faith. Faith may express itself through diverse forms, but from the psychological point of view, they are one and the same thing and cannot be diversely labeled. The only differences in faith are differences of degree. Faith may be strong and vital or weak and lukewarm. A weak and lukewarm faith does not carry a man further than adherence to rituals and ceremonies. But a strong and vital faith is bound to take the aspirant beyond the external forms of religion and help him to eschew the husk and get at the kernel of true spiritual life. Faith reaches its natural climax and goal when it comes to rest in one's own Master. Story of Kalyan. The faith of the disciple must always be securely grounded in his experience of the divinity of the Master. He must not be like a straw carried anywhere by the slightest breeze. He should be like a rock which remains unmoved in the severest of storms. The story of Kalyan brings out the meaning of a really sound faith in the Master. Kalyan was a disciple of Swami Ramdas, who was a perfect master at the time of Shivaji. The Master loves all disciples alike, but some might be particularly dear to him, just as a man loves all parts of his body, but the eyes may be more dear to him than his fingers. Swami Ramdas had many disciples, but his favorite was Kalyan. Other disciples did not quite understand why Kalyan should be dearer to the Master than the others. Once Swami Ramdas tested the devotion of his disciples. He asked all his disciples to come to him and pretended to be so sick as to be on the point of death. He had placed a mango on the joint of his knee and bound it up by means of a bandage so that it looked like a huge swelling. Swami Ramdas pointed to the swelling and told the disciples that it was a malignant tumor and that there was no chance of his living unless someone sucked the poison from the joint of his knee. At the same time, he made it clear to all that whoever sucked out the poison would die instantaneously. Then he asked whether any disciple was prepared to suck out the poison from the swelling at the cost of life. All the disciples hesitated, except Kalyan, who arose immediately and began to suck from the swelling. To his surprise, Kalyan found sweet mango juice and not poison, and Swami Ramdas praised his unswerving faith and self-denying love. To be willing to die for the happiness of the beloved is true love. Such implicit faith, unfaltering love, and undivided loyalty as that of Kalyan can come to the disciple only through the grace of the Master. The Master realized through service. Undivided loyalty to the Master does not introduce any narrowness in the sphere of the disciple's life. To serve the master is to serve your own self and every other self. The master dwells in universal consciousness and wills universal spiritual well-being. To serve the master is therefore to participate in his cause, which is to serve all life. While sharing in the work of the master, the disciple may be required to be in touch with the world, but though moving in the world in accordance with the work which is in store for him, he is in inward contact with the master as infinite being. Therefore, by sharing in the work of the master, the disciple comes closer to him and becomes an integral part of his consciousness. Sharing work of the master. The service which the disciple can offer the master is not only linked with the universal cause of humanity, but is one of the most potent means of bringing the disciple nearer his spiritual goal. When the disciple's service is spontaneous, wholehearted, selfless, and unconditional, it brings him more spiritual benefit than can ever come by any other means. Serving the master is a joy for the disciple, even when it means an ordeal that tries his body or mind. Service offered under conditions of discomfort or inconvenience is a test of the disciple's devotion. The more trying such service becomes, the more welcome it is for the disciple, and he voluntarily accepts physical and mental suffering in his devoted service to the master. He experiences the bliss of spiritual fulfillment. Cases of conflict. The sense of undivided and absolute loyalty to the master is made possible by the right understanding of what the master is and what he really stands for. If the disciple has an imperfect grasp of the true status and function of the master, he is likely to set up a false antithesis between his own higher self and the master. As a consequence of this antithesis, he might create in his mind an artificial and imaginary conflict between the claims of the master and other claims which seem legitimate. A disciple should realize from the very beginning the master only requires that the disciple should realize his own higher self. In fact, the master symbolizes this higher self of the disciple and is none other than his higher self, which is the same one reality in all. So allegiance to the master is only another form of allegiance to one's higher self. This does not mean, however, that merely formal allegiance to the higher self is in any way an adequate substitute for allegiance to the master. The disciple cannot have a clear perception of his own higher self until he is God realized, and often that which comes to him as his duty is really a prompting of some sanskaras interpolating themselves between the higher self and his field of consciousness. The master, on the contrary, is one with the higher self and can make no mistake about right valuation. The disciple, therefore, must always test his own promptings by means of the standards or orders given by the master, and in the event of any conflict between the two, he should thoroughly re-examine his own ideas to discover the points wherein they might be short of perfection. Almost always, a little reflection is sufficient to complete his own thinking and to perceive the basic harmony between the true dictates of his own higher self and the requirements of the master. If, however, on some rare occasion, the disciple is unable to reconcile the two, he may be sure that he has either not properly understood the dictates of his own higher self, or that he has not properly grasped the import of his master. In such cases, the master himself requires that the disciple should follow his own conscience at any cost. The master may sometimes give instructions with the intent of preparing his disciple for a higher mode of life, and it is under such circumstances that the disciple finds himself confronted by an apparent and temporary variance between his own inclinations and the master's instructions. But usually the master does not give any instructions for which the disciple has not had inward anticipatory preparation. Real meaning of discipleship. The master is supremely impersonal, and always his only concern is to remove the veils between the consciousness of the disciple and his higher self. Therefore, there can never be any real conflict between the allegiance of the disciple to his master and his allegiance to his own higher self. Indeed, at the end of his search, the disciple discovers that the master is none other than his own higher self in another form. The master, in his utter impersonality and unhampered divinity, is so complete that he has no desire. In relation to the disciple, all that he requires is that the disciple should reconstitute himself in the light of the highest truth. To become a disciple is to begin to tread the path leading towards the spiritual goal. This is the meaning of true discipleship. Jai Baba.